Hello, this is your Sunday lecture from Miss Stegan. I'll be talking about your creative analysis assignment, but I also wanted to just set up the week with your retrospective, reflective writing, and then looking back at last week's assignments a little bit. So first, we started this whole unit thinking about structure, thinking about the ways that a book could be structured non-linearly. And the Joy Luck Club is definitely a good example of how that can happen. I asked you to share your responses around books and the way that they've been structured that you've read. And here are just some of the responses, but I actually have shared that survey so that you could see everybody's responses. And I'll go to it as well, just briefly. I think that's interesting to see the results here, and I actually had a great conversation back and forth with one of you about Lord of the Flies. What is the structure of Lord of the Flies? And this student agreed that it's a mix of linear and in media res structure. I like that he said it's 75% linear and 25% in media res, which I think is good. That's right. I think Lord of the Flies is a chronological study of an island, so it's moving in a linear fashion. It does drop you down right into the middle of a conflict. It's not the most important conflict, ironically, that the boys are stranded. It's the setup for all of the important conflicts, though. I think the most important conflict there is their descent into savagery, and that conflict progresses later in the story, so it's linear. But you can definitely argue that that conflict would never have happened if they weren't dropped into the middle of an island, and we do come in on that scene. So I think, yeah, it's both. And so many of these books are going to blend structures. They're going to straddle structures. They're going to be a little of this and a little of that. And you'll be able to say with confidence what you believe a book is. I think the important thing is just that you support it. And a lot of you did that, exactly that, in your surveys. So we have some other great examples. Linear Structure, Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe. That's a great book, and I love to see it referenced. So linear structure. I'm trying for the most part to pull texts otherwise that I think are well known and that you might have experienced at some point in your education. So another great example of in media res structure is the Odyssey, which drops us right down in the middle of the action. Dante's Inferno, which is another good example of a linear progression, but it's true that even the poet says, this is the middle. I am in the middle of things. This is importantly the middle of my life as you meet me. So the poet acknowledges this is in the media res. And then you get flashback. The Joy Luck Club is definitely flashback. It's also a framed narrative, and it's also epistolary, so it's the blend, I think, of all of these. And a lot of you had that to offer as well. Great Gatsby is also nice flashback style. It's hard to find a novel that's exclusively flashback and doesn't also bring it forward to the present at some point. Their Eyes Are Watching God is a really good example of a book that is truly both flashback and a framed narrative, because we meet Janie coming down the road, and the whole story is her telling Phoebe about her life, but it ends with her back in that scene telling Phoebe. So it's both a flashback and a framed narrative, and so often framed narratives are both flashback and framed. My Antonia is another really nice example I read from one of you, Wuthering Heights. Great stories where it's a story within a story. And then epistolary, which I absolutely can see the Joy Luck Club fitting into that schema because it's a series of vignettes. Some other classic ones, Screwtape Letters, a series of letters that a demon writes to his lesser demon nephew, Wormwood. And then The Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank. That's a great example of an epistolary structure. I'll show you briefly. Here you are. These are your responses. And again, I've shared this, so if you want to go through and see other people's responses, you can. You can match them with a person, but it's harder to do, so it's sort of a nice blank slate where you can see what other people have thought. Going all the way down, we have some nice examples there that I didn't mention in this quick synthesis. Okay, so structure. And we are going to be talking about structure again this week. But before I go into that, briefly, we're going to look back, and we are going to think about your Lord of the Flies untimed rights. So I'm asking you to visit your goal tracking documents this week. And don't worry if you have blank weeks in there, that's normal. I'm explicitly asking you sometimes to go to those documents. This is such a time. The documents are going to be a really important guide for you when you and I have our conference, our written conference, about how you're performing in the class and how you're achieving different metrics. The goals that you're setting or that I'm setting with an eye to your writing, those will be the most important things to improve upon. And I'm asking you to think about, what are some other goals I can set? We're a quarter into the class, a little bit less than that, I suppose. What is something that I think I can improve on? So to figure that out, go to my feedback and synthesize it and add it to this particular week, November 1st to 5th, about what I've said I see in your writing, what you could improve. And then think about your own feedback for yourself. What are some things that you feel you're making progress in? Where are some areas where you know you can improve? By the end of all of this, you should have 2 to 3 goals. It is not too late to add those here in this document that's linked to the slides. That's also in the email. It's your chance to add a goal if you so choose. And you can also declare a goal met. You can say, that goal, number 1, Ms. Deegan asked me to work on ly adverbs. I've figured out how to get them out of my writing, and I'm going to move past this goal. That's great. You can declare it met and then set a new goal that's more meaningful for you at this time. So spend some time in that document this week. I've deliberately tried to create assignments for you this week that complement each other nicely, so there's a little less individual work there, so you can spend the time in the goal tracking document. And like I said, this does feed in eventually to your grade. Your grade in the class is based on how you're achieving the goals of the class and how you're achieving these individual goals that you're setting. So it really helps to have very specific thoughts about what it is that you want to improve. All right. So on to this week's assignments. We're going to be thinking about structure, like I said, but we're going to look at a different kind of structure. There's 2 sorts of structure. One is the very physical way that something can be organized, whether it be a poem or a book. But there's also the content of the structure. And to get there, I want us to be thinking about archetypes. Archetypes are situations, settings, and characters that are universally known. Arc meaning something that overreaches all things. And because of those situations and settings and characters, we as readers can sink immediately into familiarity with the impact of that particular story. Archetypes are drawn alongside of universal understandings. They point to what is true about humanity. They are good. They are the opposite, the antidote to stereotypes, which fixate wrongly on something that is believed to be true about a particular kind of person or group of people that is superficial and erroneous. Archetypes seem to be true across many cultures and time and place. So we're thinking about archetypes as another kind of structure. Good novels rely on archetypes because good novels are deeply invested in understanding what is true about humanity. So let's look at some examples. All right, so quick definition, archetypes are identifiable in universal patterns in literature, and that might be with character. Characters like the Earth Mother, the person deeply connected to the land. The good old boy, the person who is an underdog of sorts who always comes through and can be relied upon. The hero. What an archetype. That's something that repeats itself in every culture across every time. Settings, archetypal settings, things that you might have seen in stories that you've read, you already have associations with them. And cultures have different relationships with these places, but the settings themselves have archetypal qualities. So forests, typically places of somewhat wild happenings, sometimes cultivated, but sometimes the unknown exists there. Underworlds, utopias, dinners. An author I was reading mentioned this as an archetype, and I thought, oh, that's fascinating. But it's true that the archetypal scene of somebody gathering their friends and family around a table is archetypal. And that happens a lot in the Joy Luck Club. Situations. All of these situations are archetypal. They cross culture. sacrifice, rebirth, a noble birth, especially a hidden noble birth where the noble person is not yet known, a journey, a fall from grace. There's so many more. So I ask, what am I missing? What are some other classic archetypes that repeat throughout literature? And any of those are possible for your thinking today. In fact, I challenge you in your response to think of something that I haven't mentioned here, though, of course, I put these up there as a good collection to begin thinking about. Your question is rather simple, and you get to make it as complex as you like. What archetypes do you see in the Joy Luck Club? Remember, it has to be a universal character, situation, or setting. The challenge is to think outside of a chronological time and culture, because otherwise you might end up defining a stereotype of a given culture, and that's shallow thinking. So write for a few sentences about one of the archetypes you have read so far in the Joy Luck Club. You can find a quote, but it's not necessary. Through this archetype, here's your challenge question at the end. What universal theme is already unfolding before your eyes in this story? Look forward to hearing what you all have to say.